I and my husband Eric have been married for 6 months, and I'm already wondering if I made a huge mistake. I know that sounds dramatic, but please bear with me. For context, I've worked in historical preservation for over a decade, specializing in restoring period homes while maintaining their architectural integrity. It's not just my job, it's my passion. When Eric and I got married last year, his stepfather Warren volunteered to photograph our wedding. He claimed to be semi-professional, whatever that means. And while I was hesitant, Eric insisted his stepfather was reliable and that it would mean a lot to his mother, Diane. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Mistake number one, obviously. On our wedding day, Warren took photos during the ceremony but then completely disappeared immediately after without telling anyone. No photos of the reception, family gatherings, or our first dance. Nothing. When we confronted him the next day, he claimed he felt overwhelmed by the social demands and that his autism made it impossible for him to continue. I should mention that this autism was self-diagnosed just a month before our wedding. Convenient timing, right? My mother-in-law, Diane, immediately jumped to Warren's defense, insisting I should be more understanding of his neurodivergence and that the ceremony photos were plenty. I was devastated, but tried to keep the peace. Story of my life. After this disaster, I told Eric I was setting a firm boundary that I would never depend on Warren for anything important again. He reluctantly agreed at the time, though clearly that didn't stick, as you'll see. Fast forward to now. Eric and I just purchased a 1930s craftsman bungalow that qualifies for a historical preservation grant if renovated according to specific guidelines. This renovation is also being partially funded by money I inherited from my grandmother, who specifically stipulated that it be used to create a home that honors her love of historical architecture. This house is my dream project. Original hardwood floors, built-in cabinetry, and those multi-paned windows that you just can't find anymore. I'm trying not to get too technical here, but hopefully you get my point. Last night, we had dinner with Eric's family. Everything was going fine until Diane announced that Warren had many wonderful ideas for the redesign of our home and had already drawn up plans to modernize the space. I was shocked. Not being dramatic, I almost refrained from reacting. Warren pulled out sketches showing an open concept design that would remove several load-bearing walls and period details that are protected under the historical preservation guidelines. His design would not only disqualify us from the grant, but would also violate the terms of my grandmother's inheritance. Not to mention, it would destroy the historical integrity of the home, which is the entire reason we bought it in the first place. When everyone looked to me for a response, I calmly reminded Eric of our previous conversation about not depending on Warren for important projects, especially given my professional expertise in this exact field. I thought this was reasonable. Maybe I wasn't, but Eric became angry. "You're just holding grudges," he said in front of everyone. "This is why you don't have close friends in our new city. You always have to have a problem with someone." The dinner fell silent. Diane looked at me while Warren began detailing how he'd fix the outdated features of our house. You know, the historical elements that were the entire reason I fell in love with the property. I sat there as this man with zero preservation experience explained how he was going to demolish everything I valued about our home. I finally told Eric that he and Warren could handle the remodel without me, then left before I completely broke down. I cried the entire drive home, pathetic I know, and was already in bed when Eric finally returned. Instead of apologizing, he continued to defend his stepfather, saying I was overreacting about just some photos and should give Warren another chance. Here's where I'm really confused. Am I actually being unreasonable here? Warren has no experience in historical preservation. The plans he drew up would violate our grant requirements and the terms of my inheritance. Not to mention, this is my professional field. I do this for a living and have for over a decade. Meanwhile, Warren's only qualification seems to be that he watched a lot of HGTV and once built a deck that apparently collapsed during a family barbecue, though no one likes to talk about that. What's even more frustrating is Eric's complete dismissal of my concerns. The comment about me not having close friends in our new city was a low blow. We moved here for his job 6 months ago, so of course I'm still building my social circle. I feel frustrated here. Am I really expected to hand over control of our home renovation to the same man who couldn't even handle taking photos at our wedding? I haven't said anything to Eric since last night. He left for work this morning acting like nothing happened, while I called in sick because I couldn't stop crying. Embarrassing, I know. I keep thinking about all the beautiful historical elements that Warren wants to destroy, and the fact that Eric doesn't seem to care at all about my professional opinion or the financial implications. Part of me wonders if this is some sort of power play by Warren and Diane. They've always been a bit controlling with Eric. Once they surprised us by repainting our apartment while we were on vacation without asking because Diane didn't like our color choices. But this is different. This is our home and my career expertise being completely disregarded. What makes it worse is that other family members are now texting me saying I should apologize for embarrassing Warren at dinner. Apparently, walking out when someone is actively dismissing your expertise and planning to demolish load-bearing walls in your home is considered rude. I haven't responded to any of them because I honestly don't trust myself not to say something I'll regret. I love Eric. I really do. But this situation has me questioning whether he respects me at all. If he can't stand up for me over something this important, something that involves both my professional knowledge and my inheritance, then what does that say about our future? I keep wondering if I'm overreacting, but then I look at Warren's designs again and feel upset. Thanks for reading this absurdly long post. I'm genuinely lost about what to do next and could use some outside perspective from people who aren't telling me to let a 70-year-old man with no relevant experience redesign my historically significant home. Now for the first update. Holy crap. I didn't expect my post about my husband's stepfather trying to bulldoze through our historical home to get so much attention. Seriously, I woke up to hundreds of notifications and had to turn my phone off for a bit. First, thank you all for the validation that I'm not crazy for wanting to protect both my inheritance and the historical integrity of our home. After that disastrous dinner where Eric threw me under the bus in front of his family, I couldn't face going home right away. I texted my colleague May and asked if I could crash at her place for the night. She immediately said yes. May is an absolute saint and didn't even ask questions until I showed up at her door. While at May's, my phone kept lighting up with texts from Eric. Not apologies, mind you, but messages asking why I was making such a big deal about Warren's involvement and that I was embarrassing the family by walking out. I turned my phone off and spent the night on May's couch, trying to figure out if my marriage was already beyond saving after only 6 months. Not being dramatic, when someone dismisses your entire career and expertise in front of their family, it really makes you question everything. The next morning, I finally went home to confront the issue. Eric seemed more apologetic, or at least, he recognized he'd messed up. He admitted he shouldn't have brought up my lack of close friends in our new city, a low blow that many of you pointed out was manipulative and cruel. However, he was still insisting we should at least consider Warren's design ideas to keep the peace with his family. I sat Eric down and tried to explain as calmly as possible that this wasn't just about the wedding photography incident or my personal feelings about Warren. This was about our financial future and legal obligations. The designs Warren had drawn up would violate multiple provisions of our historical preservation grant, potentially causing us to lose thousands of dollars in funding. Not to mention, they'd go against the stipulations of my grandmother's inheritance, which was funding a significant portion of the renovation. These aren't just aesthetic preferences, I told him. These are legal and financial requirements we have to meet. Many commenters understood this instantly. Thank you for that validation. Eric still seemed reluctant, but finally agreed to at least consult with the Historical Preservation Board before making any decisions. I considered this a small victory, though I wasn't holding my breath that he'd actually stand up to Warren when the time came. A couple days later, I was organizing paperwork for the renovation when I noticed something odd about our home's sale history. The previous owners had only lived there for 8 months before selling, unusual for a historical property that typically attracts dedicated long-term owners. They'd also begun renovation work but abandoned it suddenly. This raised some red flags for me. Call it professional intuition or just plain nosiness, but something felt off. After some digging, and yes, I fully admit I went into full investigation mode, I found the previous owners' contact information and reached out to them. What they told me was surprising. They had initially hired Warren for their renovation after Diane's recommendation, claiming he was an experienced contractor with a passion for older homes. But Warren had abandoned the project halfway through, leaving them with unusable spaces, no working bathroom, and thousands in remediation costs to fix his mistakes. They ended up selling the house at a loss just to escape the financial nightmare. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This wasn't just about Warren being unreliable. He had directly harmed the previous owners of our home. I thanked them for the information and immediately tried to share this revelation with Eric. Big mistake. The moment I mentioned I'd contacted the previous owners, Eric's face clouded over. He accused me of investigating his family and trying to find problems where there weren't any. To those who commented that Eric seems to always defend his family over me, you were spot on. Our argument was interrupted when a truck entered our driveway. To my horror, Warren had arrived unannounced with a truck full of tools and materials. He waltzed into our home. Apparently, Eric had given him a key without telling me, which many of you correctly predicted might happen, and announced he was ready to get started on demolishing the dining room wall that afternoon. I stood there in shock as Warren began measuring and marking walls for demolition without any permits, plans, or discussion. Eric was clearly uncomfortable but said nothing to stop his stepfather. Just stood there, awkwardly shifting his weight from foot to foot, while Warren started slapping X's on our historical woodwork with masking tape. Finding my voice, I explained as calmly as possible that we didn't have the necessary permits yet, and that the wall Warren wanted to remove was load-bearing and historically protected. His response: "Women always make things more complicated. This wall is nothing, seen hundreds like it. We can just handle the permits later. No one really checks these old houses anyway." Several commenters predicted this exact scenario, that Warren would try to start work without permits. You were frightfully accurate. Warren continued unpacking his tools on our antique hardwood floors, though Warren made sure to leave his tools scattered around our dining room, all while completely ignoring my presence and explaining to Eric how they could make quick work of the dining room and have it opened up by dinner. I reached my limit. I physically placed myself between Warren and the wall he was about to damage. As co-owner of this home and a trained preservationist with 15 years of experience, I do not consent to any demolition without proper permissions and planning, I stated firmly. This project will follow historical preservation guidelines, or it won't happen at all. Warren's friendly demeanor instantly changed. His face turned red as he turned to Eric and said, "Control your wife." I'm not exaggerating. Those were his exact words. I hadn't even noticed Diane had arrived with Warren until she spoke up from the doorway. "Oh dear, I think she's having one of her moments," she said with fake concern. Eric mentioned she gets emotional about old houses. To answer several common questions from my original post: 1. Yes, Warren and Diane always arrive as a unit. 2. No, they never call before showing up. And 3. Yes, Diane constantly speaks about me in the third person, even when I'm standing right there. Eric finally intervened, though not in the way I'd hoped. Instead of supporting my completely reasonable position about, not demolishing load-bearing walls without permits, he suggested everyone calm down and that we table the discussion until we could come to a compromise. After Warren and Diane reluctantly left without starting demolition, though Warren made sure to leave his tools scattered around our dining room, I pulled up the historical preservation guidelines, grant requirements, and inheritance stipulations. I showed Eric exactly why Warren's plans would be both structurally unsound and financially disastrous for us. If we follow Warren's plan, we'll lose the $45,000 grant, I explained, pointing to the specific requirements, and we'd be violating the terms of my grandmother's inheritance, which could mean paying back the $70,000 we've already received. Not to mention that removing a load-bearing wall without proper engineering would compromise the entire second floor of our home. Eric finally seemed to understand the practical concerns, but still had the audacity to suggest I could be nicer about it and find a way to include Warren that makes everyone happy, as if preserving our home, our finances, and my inheritance were less important than Warren's feelings about a project he had no right to be involved in. I'm very frustrated. Eric seems to understand intellectually why Warren can't do the renovation, but emotionally, he's still putting his stepfather's feelings above our financial security and my professional judgment. And yes, to the Redditors who suggested couples counseling in my original post, I'm looking into it because I don't know how else to make Eric understand that this pattern of behavior is destroying our marriage. Edit for clarity. The previous owners confirmed they never reported Warren to any contractor board because Diane paid for the remediation work out of her personal savings, which makes me wonder how many times she's covered for his mistakes in the past. I've saved some of your comments about setting boundaries with in-laws to read when I'm feeling uncertain about standing my ground. Thank you all for helping me realize I'm not overreacting to what's clearly an unreasonable situation. Now for the second update. Update 2. Well, it's been 2 weeks since my last post. Sorry for the delay. I've been a bit busy trying to salvage both my house and my marriage. Thank you all for your incredible support. Your comments have been keeping me sane while everything else crumbles around me. The past couple weeks have involved negotiations about our renovation. Eric keeps suggesting compromises that somehow always involve Warren having significant input. Every conversation ends with Eric saying things like, "He's just trying to help us," or "We need to meet him halfway between proper historical preservation and demolition," right? I first started noticing something was off when I'd come home from work to find small changes around the house. Furniture slightly moved, pencil marks on walls that weren't there before, measuring tape left out. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. Thanks, gaslighting. But finally caught on that someone had been in our house while I was gone. When I confronted Eric about it, he got this look on his face. I gave Warren a key so he could look around and get ideas, he admitted. He's family. I don't see the problem. I absolutely lost it. This man who had abandoned our wedding photography, who had tried to demolish load-bearing walls without permits, and who had bullied and belittled me, now had unrestricted access to our home without my knowledge or consent. I demanded we change the locks immediately and implement a clear project plan with the certified historical preservation contractor I'd been recommending from day one. After about 4 hours of back and forth, during which I may have threatened to move out, Eric finally agreed. The next morning, I got a call. The historical preservation grant officer wanted to clarify some confusion because someone claiming to be our project manager had contacted them about modifying the requirements for our renovation. Warren had actually called our grant officer and tried to negotiate exceptions to the historical preservation standards. The officer warned me that the changes Warren had proposed would immediately disqualify us from the $45,000 funding and potentially flag us for attempting to defraud the Historical Commission. I was furious and terrified at the same time. We needed that grant money to complete the renovation properly. While gathering documentation to secure our grant status, I decided to do a deeper background check on Warren, which I probably should have done months ago, Thibault. What I found was shocking. Warren had been reported to the local contractors board 3 separate times for performing work without proper licensing, and one of those complaints was from the previous owners of our house. At this point, I'd had enough. I arranged a meeting with Eric, Warren, and Diane, telling them I had important information about the renovation that we all needed to discuss. I prepared a folder with all my documentation, Warren's history with the contractors board, statements from the previous owners, the grant requirements, and photos of the unauthorized visits to our home. When they arrived, Warren was carrying rolled-up plans. I calmly laid out everything I'd discovered, including his pattern of starting projects without proper credentials, abandoning them when challenged, and causing financial harm to those who trusted him. Warren stood up, shouting angrily. "This is character assassination," he shouted. "Those clients didn't appreciate my vision. They became too demanding and nitpicky about codes and permits when what matters is the finished product." Diane immediately began crying. "How could you be so cruel?" she sobbed, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she somehow had ready. "That's ancient history. You don't understand Warren's artistic temperament. His neurodivergence makes him sensitive to criticism." I kept my cool, but then Warren said something. "I went around you because I knew your expertise would get in the way of my vision," he said. "Besides, Eric told me privately to just go ahead because you'd eventually come around." I turned to look at my husband, who suddenly looked away. He wouldn't meet my eyes, neither confirming nor denying Warren's claim that he had approved going behind my back on our home renovation. Warren took Eric's silence as agreement. "I've already ordered custom materials for the renovation," he announced. They're non-refundable, so you're committed now, regardless of what she wants. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that losing my temper wouldn't help. As equal owner of this house and the primary contributor to the renovation funds through my inheritance, legally nothing can proceed without my signature, I explained, keeping my voice steady. And I will not be providing that signature for unlicensed work that violates our grant requirements. The meeting ended. As I was gathering my documents, I overheard Diane in the hallway, trying to console Warren. This is just like what happened with the Andersons and the Patels. More families who'd had negative experiences with Warren. I made a mental note to track them down. After they left, Eric and I had a major argument. I pointed out that he had completely betrayed my trust by giving Warren a key without telling me, by apparently telling Warren to go ahead with his plans behind my back, and by sitting silently while his stepfather tried to financially and legally compromise us. I just wanted everyone to get along, Eric muttered, which might be the lamest excuse I've ever heard for potentially throwing away tens of thousands of dollars and violating multiple legal agreements. I've been sleeping in the guest room for the past 3 nights. Eric keeps trying to initiate conversations with phrases like, "I think we just need to find a middle ground. There is no middle ground between legal and illegal, and family is complicated." No kidding. Yesterday, I contacted a lawyer friend to understand my options. Since my name is on the deed and my inheritance is funding most of the renovation, I have legal ground to prevent Warren from touching our home. I've also changed all the locks, again, and installed a security camera at our front door, just in case. The most frustrating part is that Eric still doesn't seem to fully grasp the severity of the situation. He keeps talking about this as if it's just a disagreement about paint colors, not potential fraud and financial disaster. I'm beginning to wonder if there's something deeper going on with his relationship with Warren and Diane that I don't understand, or if he's just the most conflict-avoidant person. I'm currently researching the Andersons and Patels, hoping to learn more about their experiences with Warren. I'll also be meeting with the Historical Preservation Board next week to ensure our grant is secure despite Warren's interference. I'm trying to focus on protecting my home and my sanity right now, while figuring out if my marriage can be saved. I'll update again when I know more about the other families Warren has apparently harmed, or if anything significant changes with Eric. Now for the final update. Final update. The Warren situation is finally resolved, and it's not what anyone expected. Thank you all for your incredible advice and support through this whole ordeal. I truly couldn't have gotten through this without you guys. It's been just over a week since my last update. Eric and I have been walking on eggshells around each other, with him sleeping in the guest room and our conversations limited to necessary household logistics. Not exactly newlywed bliss. I've been spending most evenings researching the Anderson and Patel families that Diane mentioned, hoping to understand the full extent of Warren's renovation disasters. On Tuesday morning, I received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "Warren Miller Renovation Victims Support." A woman named Sarah Anderson had found me through the Historical Preservation Registry where our renovation project was listed. She explained that her parents lost nearly $120,000 of their retirement savings after hiring Warren to remodel their kitchen and basement. Warren had abandoned the project halfway through when they questioned why no building inspector had been by to check his work. I called Sarah immediately. What she told me was horrifying. Warren had leveraged his friendship with her uncle to get the job, claimed decades of contracting experience he didn't have, started demolition without permits, and disappeared when challenged about his methods. The Andersons later discovered he damaged supporting structures that weren't visible until they hired a real contractor to fix his mess. The repair costs were astronomical. Through Sarah, I connected with 3 other families with similar stories spanning the last decade. The Patels, the Garcias, and the Nguyens, all cases where Warren had used family or friendship connections to secure renovation jobs, claimed expertise he didn't possess, started work without proper approvals, and bailed when questioned. I carefully documented everything they shared. I consulted with my lawyer friend who specializes in real estate. She confirmed that Warren's pattern of behavior could potentially constitute fraud, especially given the evidence that he'd repeatedly misrepresented his qualifications and abandoned projects after receiving payment. When I got home Thursday evening, I found Eric sitting at our kitchen table surrounded by papers. My heart sank when I recognized them as the documentation about Warren's previous projects. But Eric's face wasn't angry. He looked devastated. I verified everything, he said quietly. I called the contractors board myself. I even spoke with the Andersons. His voice cracked as he explained that not only was everything I'd said true, but he'd discovered Warren had actually been sued twice and had a lien placed against his property for unpaid judgments related to renovation disasters. Eric had spent the last 2 days doing his own investigation into his stepfather's history. I owe you an apology, Eric said, his eyes red-rimmed. I should have trusted you from the beginning. Before I could respond, there was aggressive knocking at our front door. Warren and Diane stood on our porch, Warren clutching plans and Diane holding a casserole dish. Eric answered the door while I hung back in the dining room. Warren marched in without waiting for an invitation, announcing he was ready to put this unpleasantness behind us, and had revised his plans to accommodate some of OP's concerns while still maintaining his vision. He started unrolling the plans on our coffee table. What happened next still feels surreal. Eric told Warren they wouldn't be using his services and that he owed me an apology for his behavior, both regarding the wedding photos and the current situation. Warren's demeanor changed as he turned to Eric. You're taking her side over family now, he said. Have you forgotten who took you in when your own father didn't want you? I could see Eric react to those words, but instead of backing down, my husband straightened his shoulders. I've spoken to the Andersons, Eric said, and the Patels, and the Garcias, and the Nguyens. Warren's expression changed as Eric continued, turning to Diane. Mom, how could you keep enabling this knowing how many people he's hurt? Diane admitted she'd spent decades covering for Warren financially and emotionally. She'd made countless excuses to family members and friends while secretly draining her own retirement accounts to pay for his mistakes. He always promises it will be different next time, she said. I wanted to believe him. Warren showed no remorse and blamed ungrateful clients with unrealistic expectations as he stormed toward the door, threatening that the entire family will hear about this betrayal. Diane hesitated. Mom, Eric said gently, you deserve better than this. After 30 years of marriage, Diane nodded and sat back down. Warren, realizing Diane wasn't following, turned back. You'll regret this, he said, slamming our door. The three of us sat in stunned silence. Finally, Diane looked up at me. I have things to tell you both, she said. About Warren, about the money. She revealed that Warren had been stealing from their joint accounts for years, had maxed out credit cards in Diane's name, and had a gambling problem he'd hidden from everyone. He'd been using renovation jobs to cover his losses, counting on family connections to avoid legal consequences when projects went south. Eric helped his mother call her bank to freeze their joint accounts and credit cards. I made coffee as they worked through immediate financial steps. By midnight, Diane had called her sister to arrange temporary housing, Eric had changed our security system codes, and I had contacted our lawyer friend for recommendations on how Diane could protect herself legally. That was 3 days ago. Since then, we've learned Warren cleared out what was left in their joint accounts before the freeze took effect, about $17,000, and hasn't been seen since. Diane filed for divorce yesterday. The Historical Preservation Board has approved our renovation plans with the certified contractor I originally recommended, and work is scheduled to begin next month. As for Eric and me, we're cautiously rebuilding trust. He's been incredibly remorseful about not believing me sooner and has promised to work on his conflict avoidance in therapy. I'm trying to forgive the breach of trust while acknowledging the manipulation he experienced from Warren. We're taking things day by day, focusing on supporting Diane through her divorce while protecting our own boundaries. I'm still processing everything that happened, but feeling hopeful for the first time in months. Our home will be restored properly, our marriage is healing, and Warren is out of our lives. Edit. Several people have asked about legal consequences for Warren. We've learned he's fled to Florida where his brother lives. Diane is working with a forensic accountant to document the financial abuse, and 2 of the families he defrauded are considering pressing charges. I'll update if anything significant happens on that front, but for now, I'm focusing on healing and moving forward. Life is too short to let Warren take up any more of my mental energy. I never imagined this situation would end with my mother-in-law becoming an ally instead of an adversary, but here we are. Thanks again for all your support through this wild journey. This community truly helped me stay strong when I was doubting myself at every turn.